podcast. We have our special guest, Samantha Woods, today, joining us from Alberta, Canada. And Samantha has been pioneering some ADHD attention and education with the Kaizen education. Am I saying it right?
You got it. Yeah,
So,
Kaizen, Kaizen.
welcome to the podcast. So, tell us a bit more about you, what you do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Kaizen Education Services was started around, I think, about 15 years ago now, when I actually left the school system. I used to be a teacher. I was in academic counseling. I worked with all ages of students, K through 12, and ended up leaving the school system to work with students. And now we work with adults, but originally it was students and parents who were struggling with executive functioning skills. And that traditionally was known as ADHD, and a really underserved population in the schools I was working in. Not because teachers weren't trying, but because there wasn't resources, tools, or time to support them. And so I left the school system thinking, I'm going to try and work on this executive functioning thing that we didn't really know a lot about back then. I mean, this was over 15 years ago, and learned a lot about neuroscience and executive functioning, and had an aha moment of what? That's ADHD? That's ADHD? And so, fast forward 15 years, we are now working with corporate audiences, adults, students, still, and families to support and educate around executive functioning, coaching skills, and those essential skills that everybody needs, not just neurodiverse brains, but everybody.
Well, yeah, we talk a lot in the podcast that the neurodivergence is only compared to a normative, but in fact, everything's a spectrum, right? Every brain is different. Like your fingertips are different, then every brain is different, right? And to be able to talk about it and understand how neuroscience can inform some of those decisions. As you
Yeah.
know, I was just in a psychology and neuroscience conference, learned a lot of cool neuroscience, and would love to know, what you've learned, what you've applied. And it's not only just to geek out about neuroscience; it's how can we actually develop critical pedagogy, coaching, helpful tricks, and life changers, actually, right? So tell us about a bit of what you found and any specific topic you want to start with.
I mean, I'm happy to geek out about brains. I think on my LinkedIn profile, I have brain nerd as my first, my first descriptor, because I just got so into neuroscience as related to learning initially, and then in life. It's a muddied water. I don't think we can divide it anymore. So this neuroscience piece, what I learned is, I mean, so many things, especially the last 15 years with functional MRI testing and seeing what's actually going on in the brain. The biggest takeaway I had is, I mean, there's many, but I think the one I really hold close to my heart is, let's start talking about brains and not behavior. And let's start looking at what's going on in a brain and empowering people with that knowledge about themselves. You don't have to be a neuroscientist. You don't have to have a degree in science. You can really easily, with the tools we have today, really have a really strong deep dive insight and data into how your brain works. And I think if we can empower students with that, I did that in the school system by just saying, hey, let's stop talking about you not handing in your homework and you being, I'm using quotes, right? Lazy, unmotivated, all of the labels we say to these brains struggling. And let's start talking about the why behind it. What is the deficit of the skill, or what's the unsolved problem? And let's build the skill for you and solve the problem so you can fly. That was like the hugest piece, and still is, when it comes to adults or kids or parents, anybody working with a brain, which is most of us. How do we we'd
It's
like to hope
debatable.
that's most of us.
It
Um,
depends what you define by brain, but yeah. Thanks for that. Brain and behavior. It's more and more studied. I was again at a conference, but I remember taking a course in the '90s when neuroscience was still kind of, let's say, not the way it is now, but still pretty cool.
yeah.
And I took a course called Brain and Behavior, right? And that's actually that course that made me fall in love with neuroscience, right? So
Mm,
Dr. Petridis at the MNI. I remember that course really interesting, and to realize that our behavior, our thoughts also are based on our brain, right? People often have the mistaken sensation that it's your thoughts, but actually they're firing neurons that make you think something. And then I'm reading a few books. One is Incognito, and the other one is the Happiness Hypothesis, and
mm.
they both look at how you actually have a thought and then you justify it afterwards, right? So you think it's your thought, but if you look at the milliseconds, your brain fired before your thoughts happen, and then you justify it, right? But people, it's complicated for people to hear that or to think that, because it feels so much like it's your thoughts, like it's your decision, like it's right. And then you realize actually your thoughts, your behavior, all this is always linked somewhat to the brain, right? And
Yeah, it reminds me of like a hand
hormone.
on a stove, right? We
Yeah, yeah,
somehow know not to, like, we touch it, we don't feel the heat, but we know to do that,
yeah,
right? It reminds me of that, what you just said, because it's our wiring, literally our wiring.
exactly. And going through um, the process of slowly being, like, from an education point of view, K to 12. What do you think? We also support, as we know, we've chatted before, very aligned in terms of HR departments that need a lot of help in terms of
Mm,
schools, children and youth, and also parents, right? So we're dealing with kind of the same ecosystem of people that could have better wellness, better support. And what do you think the education system is doing, let's say, right, or what could they do better?
that is a huge question and a bit of my soapbox, but a research soapbox. So,
Mhm.
we really need to break down these institutional barriers and to learning. And I keep saying, I mean, I stole this quote from Maya Angelou: is we know better, we need to do better. We Education is a system, traditional education. I'm talking about, K to 12, the classrooms, the age groups, the curriculums are all based on a system that is outdated now. Like, we
Mhm.
need to, and especially now with, I mean, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but with this day-to-day innovation with AI and knowledge and information, those barriers to learning can easily be broken down, but the institutional model will suffer. And I think there's a lot of adults in and children in institutions and workplaces that aren't meeting potential, or worse yet, are really feeling like they're broken, or that there's something wrong with them. And there's nothing wrong with them. It's a different wiring from what you would say a neurotypical. And even that makes me feel weird saying, because
Yeah.
I'm like, what does neurotypical even mean? Right? What does that even mean? We're all wired, to your point, our fingerprints are different, so are our brains. But there's something funky that happens when we talk about brains. We don't feel that, we have all this accessibility. If I was in a wheelchair, or if, I had a certain physical ailment that wasn't my brain, schools and workplaces typically are really great about making accommodations for that. But if it's about my brain, we get a bit funky about that from a mindset perspective. So I think those are the hugest barriers. I think it's a mindset, it's change. We have to do things differently, and we can.
And we're talking about the school system, and I'm not saying that the school system is like prison or jail, but some might say, but no, I'm not doing any political things. But
Mhm.
just in terms of like, also when we talk about like the prison system or the legal carceral criminal system, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's like, well, we make accommodation if you did this because you had a brain tumor, and you committed a crime of passion because we saw there was a brain tumor, because it's obvious and we can document it that it right, it changed your behavior, again, brain and behavior, right? But what if it was a combination of environment and genetics that changed your behavior as well? So who is guilty and for what? And should we use punishment for inmates or for students, instead of how can we help that particular brain and behavior to be better for themselves in society, right? And I think it's a weird parallel, but I think there's also some resemblance, and it's all again with the brain affects behavior much more than we allow that in our systems. Period. Right.
I think you bring up such a great point, as far as prevention goes. And why are those why did that person end up in prison? I mean, that's that whole chicken and egg, like what are nature, nurture, all of those pieces.
Hmm.
What I do know to be true is the earlier we intervene with children, the more, and this is longitudinal studies, and you
Yeah.
know this too, have proven that if we intervene early, especially with executive functioning, and especially with loving, caring environments, and um, a child just needs one person. They need a lot more overall, but they need one person. And sometimes that's a teacher. Sometimes that's when a parent can't do that work. Or sometimes it's a parent when a child's in an environment where they're not learning or performing. They need that person, that unconditional love and support, and they need the skills to be taught early on.
Mhm.
And if those skills are taught, self advocacy, um, understanding, communicating about your brain, your learning,
Yeah.
that goes a long way to prevent. And I don't know what those numbers are, but I do know, as far as prison goes, I do know that a large percentage of inmates um, have been studied for what, obviously childhood, what happened in school, but a large number are undiagnosed
Hmm.
ADHD. Uh, and I think that could just be prevented, whether we're talking a diagnosis or not.
And I had also this insight from one of the books. This one is Incognito, that goes and say, there is some U.S. studies that show clearly that some people with a certain set of genes are 10 or more times less likely more likely to be in jail, or less likely to be in jail, right?
Mhm,
So there's a genetic factor, right?
mhm,
And it's across the board 10 times more, right? And those specific genes, there are genes that are in the Y chromosome, right?
mhm,
So male are 10 times more in jail than women, right?
mhm,
So is that cultural? Perhaps. Is it genetics? Probably as well, right? And are we allowed to say that men and women have different brains? Is that not woke enough? We do have different brain. Like we said, everyone have different brain. Period. Right.
mhm,
So I think that hormones and different sex and different genes might be one of those things that predict behavior. Might it
mhm,
be violent behavior? Might it be kind behavior? Might it be some differences in behaviors that men and women exhibit biologically, and some are cultural as well, right? So when we're having this big divide on social media, men and women and all this, and the divorce crisis and the meaning crisis, how about can we bring that back to the biology, the brain, and say, well, of course there's a cultural element,
mhm,
but as you said, like, protective factor is always to create more safety and belonging and communication and community
mhm,
than to create more cause for a device, right? And our brain is also wired, we have to know, to be tribal and to be vengeful and to be hateful and to be, sometimes not very good, right? Our brain is that. It's all of that. It's beautiful. But when we start to understand those behavior based on those constructs, we can better navigate and try to find better solutions that are suitable for those different brains, right?
absolutely. I mean, our brains are primal, right? Our brains we're not built for like today's society.
Yeah.
Our brains were built for, hunting and gathering and protecting our families and protecting ourselves. Your brain's job is to keep you alive. And then back in the day, that might have been protecting your family from an animal or another tribe or like physical attack.
Hmm.
And now it could be social media, or it could be a math test, or it could be a demotion or a promotion. So, but our brains don't know differently. And so, to your point, yes, cultural, yes, all of these, there's all these influences. All of those influences actually form your brain and your wiring. So that's why at such a young age, it is so important to get the wiring and the practice makes permanent, right?
Yes.
It's not, so this practicing from a young age to be resilient and to face challenges and to know how to navigate this bizarre world we're in right now. You got to teach that brain, because otherwise it's in that primal survival mode all the time. There's the hatred and there's the fighting for what's mine and protection. And God knows we're seeing so much of that in the world right now. Um, and that's really such a tribal piece. And it's understandable, we're human. And how do we teach our children differently in
Yes.
this new age?
And the other primal fear actually is like people fear uncertainty, and then they
Mhm.
fear the unknown, or they fear what they don't understand. So if we're able to make them understand more, then they also have less fear and more peace and calm, right?
I think that's, I mean, the relief our clients feel, adult, like we're talking, 10-year-olds to probably 70-year-olds, the relief they feel when we can share a profile with them and say, actually, this is how your brain works. And we kind of put the behavior on the shelf
Yeah.
because they've experienced this for so long. And then we're like, oh, I worked with a CEO who was convinced she had a learning disability. And then it was processing speed, right?
Yeah.
We had the conversation about, she said, I look lazy. I look like I'm not paying attention. I look like, and it became really evident during COVID. And when she was online all the time and under the gun for answers. And she said, I don't know, like I can't just sit in my office and figure it out anymore. And had self diagnosed because of all the misinformation out there.
Yeah.
And we discovered it was just processing speed. But it can, those behaviors come out as anxiety and OCD and judgment from others. And the interesting thing about our brain, from the outside looking at someone culturally, physically, you can see similarities and differences, but our brains, you can't. We all
Yeah.
have the same, like, I think we all have the same, I mean, I haven't checked, but I'm sure we all have similar colored brains and similar parts of our brain. Um, but we don't see it.
Yeah, and it affects so much, and like you said, like you can get into the stigma, right, of
Mhm.
your brain affects your behavior seems like this, and then you're classified, right? um I think now we talked about fMRI. There's also EEGs. I had someone on the podcast with neurofeedback. We can buy neurofeedback less than $300. You can look at your brain waves in the EEG, so different spectrum than the fMRI, but
Mhm.
you can find some interesting things as well. And the more you can get to know your brain, and it doesn't always have to be electrophysiological or looking at the waves or the blood flow, but there's also clues that it leaves, right? So, so when we talk, you mentioned before like misinformation and what they called ADHD or what they're still calling ADHD or ADD. Can you share with the audience what you would see or construct as a better way of seeing this?
Um, I mean, my ideal world is there wouldn't, I understand that the diagnosis is important from a collection point of view. It helps us to give a label to something and help us to understand it. But I also think it's super damaging. It's super damaging because of the misinformation. So ADHD, ASD, someone on the spectrum, someone who has OCD, I in my ideal world, it would just be a brain and we say this is what you're prone to and these are your strengths. These are your needs. This is how we've got to navigate it because you're prone to, these executive functioning deficits, for example, or you're prone to anxiety because of this. And really empowering people with the accurate understanding of what these these diagnoses mean. Like I have so many people come and say, well, and this is adults too, not just
Yeah.
you. Like, I have ADHD, so I'm here. Well, what do you know about ADHD? That's always my first question. What do you know about this thing that you've been diagnosed with? I can't pay attention. That is like
Yeah.
standard. And okay, let's start and talk about how you can pay attention. It's misdirected attention. Let's talk. So I think we need to name the conditions properly, like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Actually, it's a misnomer,
Yeah.
right? And so it's not actually a deficit of attention, it's misdirected attention, and it's actually a deficit of executive functioning skills. So that is so empowering for an individual to know versus, oh, if you went to an employer or school and said you have ADHD, that comes with a whole stigma,
Yeah.
which
It
is
does.
so not accurate. Parts of it can be, right? But this hyperactivity, especially in back to your gender point, males and females, like it presents differently, right? And so a woman can be extremely impulsive, but inside her brain, right? It might not come out as behavior. It might come out as anxiety or impulsive thoughts or trying to balance all of the things. And so I
It,
guess what
yeah.
I'm saying is with diagnosis has to come an actual debrief, not just, okay, here you go, this is what you have. We need a now what.
So we talked a bit about executive functioning. I did some research, as I always do, and I wanted to share with you and the audience. Maybe you know some of that stuff, but Postner and Peterson, 1990, looked at attention. So we're talking about attention. Is it deficit? Is it misdirected? Right. So it turns out that the dominant model of attention has three different networks. So one is the alerting network. So it's um, being the capacity to hold a steady readiness. So it's long-term focus, alertness, tonic alertness, and it's mediated mostly by norepinephrine, which is a neurotransmitter, coming from the locus coeruleus and projecting into the frontal and parietal lobes. Right. So frontal lobes is the part of the executive function,
Yeah.
but and this is actually, that part alerting is also diminished in ADHD. Again, quotes. So we see that those types of brain have less executive function and alerting at the same time. And so executive function is the referee, it's the cognition, it's the longer term, more costly thinking than the automatic thinking or the default mode thinking. And it also helps to self-regulate the emotions, or other behaviors. And it's what some people will call, you know willpower, but it's not really willpower. It's just controlling, emotional control with that power that can say, let me concentrate on this task even though I want to do something else. So people will link that as, if you have lower executive functioning or executive control network, you will have bigger impulsivity. So you can be more distracted, or you can have more addictive behaviors, and all those are linked, right? But the
Mhm,
third part of the network, which is not affected by this type of brain, which we call ADHD ish,
mhm,
is the orienting part, right? So
mhm,
the pointing the spotlight, it comes from a different type of system that is largely based on acetylcholine, and that is not really affected in those types of brains. So you can still have orientation, and that's why perhaps we know that people with those brains can still have a direction. They might have difficulty to get there, but if the direction is very clear, then kind of the attention also is able to be sustained, right?
Mhm,
So they're
mhm.
quite good at orienting, but does that make sense?
Oh, I was just looking up this one, yeah, Dr. Judy Willett. It's the system of the brain with attention, and you described it really, really lovely, because that's what's going on. And Dr. Judy Willis, she is like a guru in this field, and she studied, it's called RAD, and I can't remember the D. That's what I'm looking at, but it's reticular activating something.
Hmm.
And basically, what it is, I call it the kind of the threes in a room. Like there's, so back to our primal brains, your brain is taking in sensory information all the time. Your brain is protecting you all the time. Wants you to keep alive, right? Because you
Yep.
don't know if that tiger is going to come and attack you, right? Well, that's how your brain is thinking.
It's
And so,
protecting you or your offspring, or trying to make you have more offspring. Those are probably the normal
yeah,
things, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, we can fight that and debate it in the world, but really we are
Wired
primal
for that.
animals, right? We're wired that way. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not saying everybody goes out, and I'm just saying this is our primal network.
Yep.
So what happens is that amygdala, right? That little walnut-shaped thing in your brain, we get sensory information, our eyes, our ears, our everything, smell, and that information comes in, and that the amygdala, the security guard of our brain, for kids, we call her Amy G. Dalla. We call her like the security guard of your brain, and she protects you, right? Like she's at the door, and she decides who should come into company brain and who shouldn't. And so, if you're under threat, she will actually shut down the prefrontal cortex,
Yeah.
right? And you were talking about that. That's where all your executive functioning, I'm pointing to my forehead, but it's all that higher, sort of the CEO of your brain, the higher order thinking, time management, organization, attention, right? Time management, maybe I said that, task initiation. And so if your amygdala is heightened, that she's telling that CEO to get under the desk and be like, you're out of here. So then anxiety shuts down the thinking brain. So all the attention of all the executive functions, I always say attention is the gateway, because that reticular activating, I wish I could remember the D, system kicks in, comes in, decides whether something's worth paying attention to or reacting to. And if everything's okay, it goes through to the prefrontal cortex. You can think clearly, you can make good decisions. The other parts of the brain are online, everything's working. Some people call it the conductor of the brain,
Yeah.
like a orchestra. And so all those brain chemicals are working together. If you get a surge of stress hormone, then time management organization is not important to your brain. It's like, no, we've gotta
So
protect
playing
you.
music and an
Yeah.
orchestra. No, there's a tiger. Come on,
There's
let's
a
go.
tiger. There's a tiger attacking me, right? And nowadays, that could be for a kiddo, it's getting a weird text. And
Yeah.
for adults, it could be scrolling on LinkedIn and seeing, how great every other business is doing except yours, right? That's your tiger, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Or someone gets the grant and you don't. And those are all the tigers that attack us, that our primal brains are kicking.
So I've heard the term CEO and conductor as a metaphor for the executive function. um, and then we can also call it the executive central network, and then what we talked about, the three ones are the attentional network, and then we'll talk later about the default mode network, which is about more mind wandering and staying inside your mind instead of acting. But I was also reading lately that there's probably a better metaphor than the CEO or the conductor, right? Because as we said, when the rest is the amygdala is there, it takes over, right?
Yeah.
So the metaphor that I was reading about is more of the calling it the rider of an elephant, right? So it does ride, it can direct, but if the elephant wants to go there, it goes there. The rider is not going to stop it, right? So
Yeah.
I like
Sure.
that metaphor of like there, and it kind of shows also the power of the unconscious, the brain that is
Yeah.
there doing things automatically all the time without you directing it, right? And you can try to direct a few of your behaviors and say this and that, or I will do this, or I will not do that, or I want to do this or not do that. Aversion and desire. That's the dopamine circuits in the motivation reward pathway, which is another one. We are looking at, most of our things every day, or even right now, are not conscious. Even if we're thinking and having a conversation, so many things are happening unconsciously, right? Or
Mhm.
breathing, or skin conductance. Everything is happening, and our thinking is also a lot subconscious. It's like you're driving to a place and you're like, oh, I don't remember how I was driving there because, right, or riding a bicycle. And one of the things that we're training our brain to actually not have to think that much because it's costly to think, right? So things that we do often, we will try to have them as a unconscious behavior so that we don't have to think every time, oh, do I have to think to open the door? Oh, how do I open the door? I put my hand here and then turn the knob, right? So that
Right.
would be very time consuming for your brain if you have to think about this all the time. So we do, when we become experts, actually we become more unconscious, right?
Mhm.
And to acknowledge that is kind of also acknowledging that most of our actions and thoughts are unconscious, and that's scary to some because we want to believe that we have free will and choice and that everything's in our control. Perhaps less than we think, or perhaps not at all. But that's more of a philosophical question than a coaching and life questions. But at least we have this lack of shame and fear and saying, well, I could have done better. No, your brain is like that. You're here like this today, and what can we do about that, right?
What can we do about it? I think that's what we do know is, as you know, our brains our neuroplasticity is a
Yeah.
thing, and it is harder as we get older. And those networks are hard. It takes work, but it is possible. And I think that's the most beautiful piece of the research is that, you can early intervention as far as how the brain wiring works and the pruning. Like I think of, bushwhacking through a forest, right? You've got this young brain, right? And there's this big forest of networks. And what was practiced and learned when you were super, super young and reinforced, I mean, you're burning down a pathway in that forest, right? Over and over. So it is your automatic subconscious, if you will, or your reaction. It's programmed. It's that beaten pathway, right?
Mhm.
But there are ways you can form those new pathways. And that's why, like I said, working with kids early on is so key. But if you are an adult that has struggled, or you are an adult that, has burnt a pathway over the years, it is possible to change. Like practice makes permanent. We can build a new pathway. It's harder. I always say to students, I'm like, do everything you can now, like learn what you can, because your brain is so plastic. And it's like driving a car to your point where you're like, how did I get home? I remember my father teaching me, he was very stubborn to teach. Like we had to learn in a standard. And I still, remember like, okay, first gear, okay, the clutch, the gas, okay, the check your mirror. Like everything was so hard, right? And now I can jump in and to your point, I get home and think, how did I get home? It's all so automatic.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that's ideal. Like that's what we want for our children. And then that goes into the workplace, right? And so adults always say, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm like, you sure can. You sure can. But it's hard.
Yeah, and that I'm very adamant about well-being, subjective well-being, and happiness. So I'm writing books on happiness, and I try to teach people not only like functioning and of course emotional regulation works and is part of that, but I try to teach people to be happy, right? And
Yeah.
then once you practice it, also it becomes like automatic, right? You see things in a lighter way. You laugh more. You take it less personal. You don't stress when things that in the past used to worry you, right? So you can train your brain in many ways, but I think that two words like more positive action, more positive self-reflection without being narcissistic or too ego
Right.
focused, but confident, like you mentioned, resilient, courageous,
Mhm.
compassionate, right? All those things we can learn, and most of them will make you happy, right? That's why I have those formulas of the 4 A's, 7 C's, and I've looked at a lot of literature to say if you do this consistently, you train your brain to have this as an automatic, unconscious. Hey, there's a problem. Okay, it's not a problem; it's a challenge. I'm curious. I'm going there with courage, and that's you do that right away. Then you save the hours of agony of, oh, and this is horrible. My life is horrible. This situation is horrible, right?
Yeah, you're calming that amygdala down to just you're slowing down the like, it's giving her a big hug and being like, "We're good,"
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
moving
yeah,
into like, "We're
yeah,
okay, Amy G. Thank
yeah,
you for
yeah,
protecting me.
yeah,
Appreciate it,
yeah.
but this actually isn't life-threatening
Good.
right now."
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
And it allows the brain and, even speaking that way, it sounds silly, but it works. It's like,
No, it's
"Thank you,
awesome.
brain, for protecting me. Like, I
Yeah,
appreciate that you think because I made a mistake in my email, like, that's such a big deal. Like, you think it's life or death, but hey, actually it's not." And, talking back to your brain versus the shame talk of like, "I can't believe I did that," and that's horrible. And, and this is the networking, right? Reinforcing the number of messages we can give our brains internally is like 20 times higher than what someone verbally could say to us. So,
yeah,
I really encourage people, like you say, is to really think about what you're saying to your brain because it believes it.
yeah.
It's going to,
Doesn't
I
have to
have
be true at
this.
all. Yeah.
See, like, it
Mhm.
reminds me, like,
Yeah.
you know, to just be like, "Okay, joy, don't forget joy." Like, don't forget to I have a little tattoo that says joy. But it's like a if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. I'm like, "Oh, right, joy. It's
You know, and
important."
and and I have also this concept of the seven paladins in my first book, Beyond Happy, but it looks at like the negativity bias, right? So the brain is wired not only for threat, but it's wired to be predominantly paying attention to threat
Mhm.
because if it doesn't, then you might die and not pass on your genes. So if there's something good, it will look at it for a little bit, and then where's the threat, right? So, and because of that, we have much more negative experience in general. They last much longer, and we remember them longer, right? So that's why they say in marketing you need to have like 20 good reviews for one bad review, right? Because people will read that bad review and say, "Oh, that's horrible," right? And that's why you were with your partner for years, but they remember that one thing that they hated about you, right? So um, and our brain are wired like that, but there's many things that we can do, first starting with awareness and knowledge, and
Mhm.
then helping people like with like it's not silly, like it's a beautiful metaphor, right? You're aware that the amygdala is there to protect you. You're able to not deny it. You say, "I'm here," I give you a hug, thank you, and
Yeah.
then move on, right? So
Yeah.
I love that. That's great.
Like the saber-toothed tiger, it's not here right now. You're okay. And, especially in this age of information overload, like our kids, all of us, but these impressionable brains are being, you know, thousands and thousands of times higher than when we were at school or young
Yeah.
people. They're just their brains are being constantly triggered. That
We've talked about the
amygdala's
stats.
go,
There
go,
is
go, right?
the teenagers are exponentially more depressed,
Oh,
more suicidal, more anxious, and less social,
yeah.
less connected, right? So
Mhm.
there is, yeah, there's, and glad that there's people like you and K's in education that are trying to help at all those levels. Because this is one of the most important thing that we can do today is making sure that it doesn't get worse, and that maybe we start to reverse the trend because it's definitely not good.
No, it's the dark side of that light side, right? Like, oh, there's all these tools and wonderful things to help and to gain access and accessibility. But there's this horrible, we're still back to the primal brain. Your child's brain, our brains are still primal. And so, you know, what you think about expands, and that is so true. So, if you're thinking about that, those text messages or the social media piece or not being good enough, that's what expands in the brain. And I think it's at a I'm so hopeful the pendulum swings, because it is at a detrimental critical point, definitely for young people, and sure, older people too, but this teenage, the stats are staggering about, eating disorders, suicide attempts,
Yes.
and a feeling of loneliness in a day, in a world where we're supposed to all be connected. There's such loneliness.
Because it isn't firstly pseudo connection online. It is not the real type of connection that we know that we want. We're missing, first of all, things like touch. Very simple. When you're a baby, what do you want? You want to be in your mom's and father's arms, right? Why? Because touch is important, right? I think people figure it out during the lockdown. Like, touch is important. When you have distancing, maybe it's not a good idea, right?
Mhm,
And we're distancing ourselves and our kids by saying, stay in your room, go play your video game or not, but come for dinner. And
mhm,
then outside is dangerous, right?
mhm,
And those are problems. Like we had some guests talk about play therapy, but in this context, I wanted to go back to like the thought, right? So I said we'll talk about the default mode network. Well, the default mode network is daydreaming, remembering, imagining, and so this is from Buckner, D. Nicola, 2019, and they contrast like, okay, well, what can we do when you're not doing the default mode network? Well, you can pay attention, right? The attention network. You can do the cognition, which is like thinking of higher plan as the writer, CEO, or conductor. I think it's more like a writer that's trying to figure it out, but
mhm,
he's trying to conduct a big animal.
mhm,
And then this research talks about the other network, which is the TPN, the tasks positive network. And it says, when you're engaged in the outside world, you think less, right? So one of the things that children can do is go outside and play, right? Then they will be less anxious. I will guarantee you that. This is not a clinical advice, but just try it to see, right?
It amazes me that some of the reports that we receive, we often get psychoeducational assessments in, and there's a series of recommendations at the end, really intensive reporting. And what's starting to appear more and more is green time for families. Like, it's an actual formal recommendation to get outside and experience nature, and those are healthy ways to develop a brain. And Dr. Segal, I don't know if you've read any of his, with the healthy mind platter, the different ways you could, much like nutrition, he
Mhm.
has a platter. It's beautiful. If you Google it, he's just got a very simple platter. I
Yeah.
think it's with 7 or 8 recommendations. And one is, just free time, like boredom, if you will, or just outdoor time, right? To just let your brain not be so focused on, what's the left brain thinking, right? And to be
Well,
free.
there's recommendation. It's great that they're starting to do that. The Surgeon General in the U.S. called the health emergency of the loneliness crisis, right? So, I mean, loneliness is not a diagnosis, by the way, but it's affecting, right?
Mm,
And nature or lack thereof is affecting. And there's studies. I looked at a lot of studies on loneliness. I looked at belonging. I looked at nature. There's ton of studies that actually nature is linked with attention, right? So
mhm,
there's this theory called nature, restoration therapy,
Mhm.
And restoration therapy is normally done by nature, but then there's other studies that said with social interaction, right? So you ask your kids to go play with their friends, they're getting two in one, and maybe a bit of sun on top of that, vitamin D, right?
Yeah.
But people don't recommend that. You buy a newer cell phone. I think that's the recommendation. Or no, unfortunately, we are interviewing a few people at the company. We're growing, and I interviewed was it this week, yeah, someone who's working in a company that does digital product, and basically they have assessment for specifically ADHD, and then you see a doctor, and then they're linked to a pharmacy network, so you receive pills at home for your diagnosis, right? So it's
Mm,
convenient. But
yeah.
but is there other solutions? I don't know. I think I know, actually. Yeah.
I think you know. I mean, I think you know. That's another piece of that, back to that education piece about what is a treatment plan for ADHD, Sure, for some people, medication, but that's only one of the 4 legs of that table
Yeah.
of treatment, right? There's environment, to your point about getting outside and then being in the right working environment, the right learning environment. There's education is the 3rd one, right? And of course, executive functioning or skills training, right? Those are the so many people when I say ask what has your doctor explained about treatment plan for ADHD? Oh, I'm not on medication. I refuse. I'm like, okay, but what about the other 3 pieces? What do
Yeah.
you mean other 3 pieces, right? And it's nobody's fault. It's just that
They don't have
there's
the
lack of
information, the
education
awareness.
and
Yeah.
information, right? It's so
and
sad.
and and again, as you said, right, I don't think both of us are against potential benefits of medication, right?
No.
I worked with pharmaceutical for years. It's just not the only option, but it's being given like like candy and saying take this and you'll be fixed, right? And we had Dr. Matika in the podcast saying, well, what's the plan, what's the option, and if you have medication, are you planning to wean off of it? Is it like temporary, or like what's the next step, or are you just taking it and because, right, are the doctors, physician, clinician, psychiatrist able to have that vision in the community and the family, right? And it's like, what do you want as an individual? What do you want as a couple, as a
Yeah.
family, as a right? So those questions are not often asked because you have X amount of time with a doctor, 15, 20 minutes, sometimes less, and then okay, this you have assessment and treatment, right? So those are useful for many people, and we're happy that there's people doing that. But if the numbers of ADHD cases have risen so much, I don't think the brain has evolved genetically that 15 years ago we were under diagnosis because we did not know. Like those are the theories, but pretty much as we were talking about, we still have a spectrum of brain, and
Mhm.
some things will work for certain brains and some will not. But we need to know what are the options, right?
Absolutely. Like what environment? Because medication, and certainly not anti-medication for if it works for somebody, but you still need that just gives you the ability to filter. And then those other 3 pieces, the scaffolding around that person. Like what's the scaffolding and the skills training to that might allow them to uptake those skills in a better way. Um, but also, it's a chemical imbalance or deficit. I mean, I think there's a ton of misinformation about ADHD medication out there that's really been detrimental as far as a treatment plan. I think it's that those other 3 pieces have not been even addressed. And
Mm,
having that environment is so important. And of course, I have people say all the time, "Oh, Sam, everyone has ADHD these days." And I get a bit kinda I'm like, "But they don't." Like, it's society. I mean, we're all showing symptoms of it. That's why I try to get away from this diagnosis piece because it's like we're all struggling with executive functioning.
yeah.
But the level of, deficit in the brain of, say, dopamine to make the neural connections, it's gonna be more obvious in someone who's missing that level of dopamine needed, and some people just naturally have more or getting it in other ways, right? So, but I'm like, but well, it's society because, yeah, sure. Is it ADHD or is it like this age of information overload where everyone's struggling to get back online, get our brains back online?
Yeah,
And
you're putting more stress on the system. It's like
yeah,
the obesity crisis, right? So we have all same, but if like, your culture is over, you know, eating food that are not good for you, like everyone's going to be affected, right? So it's not that everyone's having ADHD or everyone is overweight. It's just like, how can we as a society understand the factors again,
mhm,
not just one, and the solutions, and again, not just one, that makes this whole attention network a little bit better, right? And you talked about dopamine, so there is also like the two different pathways: mesocortical pathway, which is support the sustained focus, right, and suppress distraction. That's the one that's having a little bit more issues. But the mesolimbic pathway, so limbic is the emotion system, is running fine, and that's going to the NAC, nucleus accumbens, and we know that bottom and top nucleus accumbens go from impulsivity to compulsivity, and that is basically desire, right? So ADHD-ish, or this particular beautiful brain, is very good with interest when they're passionate about something,
mhm,
and
mhm.
less when they want to figure out what's more important today, right? So what's fun? Let's go do it.
I know. As I'm wincing listening to you about spreadsheet, yeah, it's the laundry pile of spreadsheets or data for me personally versus like, ooh, creative, awesome. I get to be on a podcast with Christian and talk about things I love and yeah, novelty, right? Novelty and stimulus.
And again, that like what we talked about at the beginning, is it a deficit, right? So if you look in terms of biology and evolutionary biology, so who will pass the gene and whatnot, right? So there is some definite advantage for having someone that has a better, cognitive function and can think longer and better about difficult problems.
Mhm,
And there's also a definite advantage of someone who's curious and going and creative, right? Creativity and curiosity are part of my 7C framework for happiness, right?
mhm.
So those are tools for happiness as well. Does it impair certain type of activity? Yes. Is someone who's too intense in their spreadsheet also not able to have fun? Yes, right. They're just different brains, different way of seeing life, and they're both, like we talked again, women and men, we need both, right? This types of brain and this type of brain, we need both, and biology continuously tell us that we need both because we keep seeing both types of brains, or like not both, but all those types of brains, right?
Sure, like the person who and that's where personal preference, right? Like
Mhm.
the person like my dear friend, she can work on a spreadsheet and get as much dopamine out of that that I will never experience, whereas she's like, how do you even public speak and do keynote? I'm like, that would be like that would drain. And so those are just differences in us.
Mhm.
The difference is, I guess, when you think of we have choices as adults in a classroom situation. I mean, I'd like to think there are more choices happening, but that's where it becomes really evident in behavior, right? When everyone is really has to meet the same standards in the same curriculum in the same way, that novelty, that engagement piece, if it's not there, that's where you're going to see some offside behavior, whether it's anxiety, depression, or actual like outward behavior, because
Yeah.
and there are times where, and I'm not saying we don't practice when you're bored, like we say, tired, distracted, or bored, that's where an ADHD brain actually really finds it hard to focus. Whereas a neurotypical who's got this level of chemical in their brain naturally is like, they might think it's boring, but they can focus.
Hmm.
Right. I guess that's the key there. And, if we could just understand that in our school system. I'm not saying we don't, because I know so much of my network are dear people that are still teaching because they believe that and they're trying so hard to do this in a system that is broken. It's not the teachers that are broken, it's the system that's broken, right? And these dear, thank goodness, they're still trying. They're like, I'm doing everything I can, but in a class of 40, to have everybody have a choice and choose their own adventure is very difficult.
Yeah, 40. I mean, there is way I did, and still studying as well in education. So there's novel ways and things that we can think about to do in classroom
Mm.
with technology or without, with differentiated learning, right? So there's solutions, but it's still slow at getting
So slow.
approval by the even the school director or school principal, and then sometimes the district, right? So and then one teacher does that, and I was hearing. Um, yeah, we were talking about plurilingualism, so being able to teach multiple language at the same time in the classroom, and
Mhm.
then so you're not giving shame to other students' accents or languages, and everyone can learn, even though we're learning one language, but we're learning others adjacent.
Mhm.
And then a teacher did that, and when the person was doing a presentation, another teacher is giving her, what is this level of English or this, right? So like you have the judgment of your peers, of others, right? So we need to have a better system in education in many ways. I do agree. But hopefully there'll be some solutions and we can implement some of them sooner than later. Just wanted to go back when you said, the, the boredom in the brain, right? Um, so there is the dual pathway model, and it looks at, so that's Sunaga Barke, and he did a few research and a model that looks at smaller soon or larger later, right? So do you want to wait, right? So delayed gratification for larger, or do you want smaller now, right? And it is something more difficult in those types of brain, which maybe I'm partly some of that brain. I do like my smaller soon, but also larger now, right? So it depends when and how. It's also contextual. It's many things, right? And instead of delay gratification, the model also looking at delay aversion, right?
Mhm.
So and the aversion is probably to something like boredom, right?
Mhm.
I wanna avoid this what I feel like is impossibly long, right?
Mhm.
And that also ties into one of my happiness framework, which is you can train that by one of the P's of happiness is patience, right? So patience is not only a virtue or whatever you want to call it, or it's a brain, we have the ability to be patient, but as we've been talking, we have neuroplasticity, right?
Mhm.
And one interesting part, people always think about the dopamine in the reward pathway system to get something now.
Mhm.
Dopamine is also used in the prefrontal lobe to delay gratification. If
Mhm.
you really want a goal and you're able to delay, you're also creating dopamine because your goal and purpose is so good, right? So this
Yeah.
is one is purpose. So you need to have a good purpose, and then you can build patience based on that purpose.
Mhm. That delayed gratification is just is such a huge piece of reaching goals, and that's that time blindness piece, right?
Yeah.
An ADHD brain typically is has a really hard time looking at long-term consequences or rewards,
Mhm.
right? And so it gets that dopamine, what craves that dopamine hit earlier, right? But you can also, I think it's Simon Sinek who, in his leadership model, I don't know if you, it's the EDSO, like you have a scale and you have
Mhm.
ED on one side and SO on the other. So it's endorphins and dopamine on one
Mm.
side,
Yeah.
serotonin, oxytocin on the other side. So those four chemicals. And the goal of the goal, which is impossible, but is the goal is to have those two sides even, right? And so that they
That's
balance
no
each other
fun.
out, right?
That's
So hard because we're
yeah.
in North America, that we're so on the ED part,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Dopamine, reward, like
Yeah.
hit the goals, hit them faster, get the money, get the likes on your Instagram, whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
Instead of like, I think of investments where, the advisors say, okay, you're in, wait 25 years, you're gonna, this is gonna be your reward in 25 years. And it's really hard in this day and age, that delayed gratification. I think you really have to practice that patience It's not
Yes.
natural in our
No,
day and age.
you have to practice. And you're very right. I've also traveled extensively. I had discussion about this week about, travels and what we think about the Middle East and Asia and Africa and the cultures. I was also talking last week with a well-traveled couple from Seattle that were visiting in Montreal, and we talked about our travels. And so what we can say, there's different attributes to different culture, right? And if you think about that Simon Sinek balance, I would say that there are definitely cultures, not Western, probably Eastern, and not Japan or South Korea or some parts of China, but some other cultures that have this oxytocin, which is touch. We talked about touch before, right? Which is community, which is going, outside and playing with your friends and not being stuck alone, right? So if you have a crisis of meaning, you're not having a crisis of belonging and isolation, you're not having oxytocin. And the serotonin, for those who don't know, the serotonin is the hormone of contentment, right?
Mhm,
So if you have serotonin, you don't need to go strive for something. You're okay right now, right?
mhm.
And some researcher describe it as, is it further than my arm needs to go? If I need to go further, then I need dopamine. If it's just in my vicinity, I'm serotonin, I'm good, right?
Yeah,
So imagine culture that have more meditation or more,
mindfulness and yeah.
mindfulness or sitting and or fishing and being quiet, or yeah,
Mhm,
we don't need to do so much. We can just be happy what we have, which
mhm.
is also problematic. If it's only that, then like you said, it must be a balance. But I think that our Western culture is definitely unbalanced, right?
Very much so. No, very much so. When you travel and go to different, you experience even just different, obviously, cultures, belief systems, and you can actually, even within our own country, going to different areas, you can feel that difference of community support, patience, versus, I always think of the city feel, right?
Yeah.
I think Simon Sinek says the selfish and the selfless chemicals, like D and
Yeah.
D are the selfish ones, they serve us. And the serotonin, oxytocin serve others. I mean, the irony of that is if you do that, it serves you because you end up being more integrated, but that's a whole other debate. But the serotonin, I mean, that's what we were built for, community, helping, like you said, touch, like, it's the oxytocin when a mother has a
Oxytocin, yeah,
baby,
yeah.
right? That, like, we give off that stuff in plenty because that's what keeps babies alive. And it's actually not just a nice to have, it's a must have. It's a
Well,
must have.
that's one of the reasons I don't have the stats in my head, but it's ridiculous. Something like 30 plus, uh, no, sorry, 30 times more smiles a day the babies have. And like something also in that range of laugh, right? So oxytocin is definitely good. And if you don't like laughing or smiling, then, come see me. We'll talk. I'll try not to
Are you
diagnose you.
happiness though?
Yeah.
Get a tattoo on your wrist, if you're that committed,
Yeah.
if you need that kind of reminder. And it sounds like I can hear somebody in my head being like, "Well, yeah, but oh, just be happier, just be this, just be that." But it's not that easy. It's actually a practice
Yeah.
of no matter what's going on, is it's a practice of gratitude, which is really difficult when people are going through really hard times. But the brain does thank you, and I'm sure you've written about that in your book. Is
Yeah.
you know who was the rabbi who wrote, like, why bad things happen to good people, or the people have been through some very very horrific events in life, and somehow, how come some people come out of it and you think, wow, like, how can you be so forward thinking and
Yeah.
loving and caring of humanity when they've been so horrible? And it's to your point of, it's a practice of gratitude and connection and community, and the brain
And
is resilient.
and every habit is hard.
Oh,
But I would say the amount of time you're wasting every day doing something that's either going towards a wall that's or climbing the wrong ladder, or being too distracted, or like you're
mhm,
probably everyone's watching probably 30 minutes of social media too much. Spend
yeah,
that time training your brain to be happy, right?
yeah.
I am arguably very happy. It's not 100%, but it's very high. In our AI, we have a AI that rates our kind of happiness and stuff at work that we created for the HR companies. And I think I scored 97, 96. And then one day I was a bit lower, like, oh, what's wrong? It happens. But,
Yeah.
and again, with my son, we used to have like manually back then. He was 10 years old. So every day he would rate dad, mom, how happy you are in a scale of 1 of 10. And we were always like 9, 10, 9, 10. And yes, there may be a small genetic factor.
Mhm.
We do have a baseline happiness, but whatever it is, you have 50% of swing that you can be happier and train your brain to do that.
And I think, that question is, what is happiness? Right? What is happiness? To start there too is I think it was Buddha who said, you know, happiness isn't the destination, it's the way, right?
Yeah.
It's the self-awareness of what does that mean for you, happiness? And getting clear on that. And then to a brain perspective, the whole amygdala just settles down and allows you to do this amazing stuff because she's not in that fight or flight all the time.
Yeah, and there is some reason to have some amygdala activation, right? So we do
Mhm,
want to push our body to be able to, like, the heart rate variability is kind of explaining that the best mental and physical um, optimum form is to be able to go to the danger state and come back real quickly,
mhm,
right? So you want
mhm.
to be normally in peace, but like if there's a tiger, you need to be able to kill it, right?
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
there's rarely a tiger anymore, but if there
Mhm,
is, right, if there is something, if you need to save your life or your family or the
mhm.
village, right, you need to be, or run for your life or whatever it is, you need to be able to activate that. But it's to come back quicker, it's to learn that, right? And you can do that with mind things, you can do that with physical things. But people will say the definition of happiness, what is it? And well, if I'm writing about it, I probably have a few definitions. But I would say firstly that the term happiness is like love. It's a bit of a common name, right? Or people say heart. Like heart is not where the love is coming from, right? It's coming from the limbic system in the brain. Um, and people still argue about me on that. I'm not sure why. Let's make a paper on that. That the heart is the seat of compassion, right? So I prefer terms like compassion and kindness than love. And for
Mhm,
happiness, I think the word is good, but joy is probably better. Joy is actually an emotion that you can see. Awe is also, like, there's a brain signature of awe. The contentment, you see some networks that, as you mentioned, are calm. You see the neurotransmitter. So there's nothing really in the brain that looks like happiness, right?
mhm,
So happiness, I would define as, and psychologists define it as subjective well-being, right? So there's well-being, right? But
mhm,
subjective is you thinking that you're happy or not, right? What I argue in my first book is that even that, and there's a lot of happiness researchers. I'm looking at a book here saying happy on purpose. There's books
mhm,
here I've written. I've met some of the top researchers in the subject, and they look at things like kindness, altruism, compassion, creativity, and happiness. There's so many good information, but to define it as something that we can hold on, I would say happiness is two things: your subjective well-being. One is your subjective well-being of experiencing something now, and one is you telling you the story about this, right?
mhm.
So are we enjoying this talk? Probably. We're laughing, we're having fun. And are we saying at the same time that we're laughing, we're having fun? Are we saying other things? I need to go to the laundry because this and that. And then you're not having fun, right? So when you're distracted, you're not actually using the experience that's pleasurable, right? And another simple example, you're at the Grand Canyon or the Giza pyramids, Machu Picchu, and you're, instead of enjoying the experience, you're taking a selfie.
Mhm.
So you're telling stories about yourself now and going to tell stories to your friends and telling stories of the future, right? So and we also have, and so we have a negativity bias, but we have a bias towards our storytelling side. We
Mhm.
are, is it Harari that says we are stories, right? And we believe stories, like you said, even there if they're not true, right?
Mhm.
And we have a propensity to believe stories more than experience. And
Mhm.
so once you understand that your subjective well-being is both experience and narration or stories, then you can start to have protocols and ideas how to make both better, and that you're happy on the two sides.
Yeah, I think that, being mindful and present is perhaps that's happiness, right? When you're mindful and present, which is again so difficult in this day and age, but possible, is, the practice of mindfulness to be in a moment, to your point about traveling or just even being watching a child play or being at the park and seeing joy. And I love watching children to remind me of what it means to be mindful and present,
Mhm.
because or even my dog, right? Like they're so in the moment of what's happening that nothing else matters. And to experience that, even for brief moments, is really brings joy. And it's proven in the research is, I mean, that's what again what has to come into schools. I know Australia is doing it. I know England, Europe, like they're way ahead of us as far as North America goes. That I don't mean just like the one teacher who decides to, or the one. It's this part of life and curriculum, and even in workplaces to have. And I'm not saying nothing to do with religious beliefs, nothing to do. It's actual brain science is to practice mindfulness to be able to be present so you can experience happiness and then
No,
you
yeah,
can do.
mindfulness. The term is not even really from Buddhism. They use other words like metta, and like it's more,
Mm,
mindfulness, self compassion, love. But it is true that many people, especially men, don't like the word mindfulness.
mhm,
And we do have. So I use the word presence,
mhm,
which is, I guess, also very relatable. And Edgar Tolle used something similar as that, and it fits better with my eight-piece theory. So M was not in there, but jokes aside, we also at A we have kind of this thing that we've built over time. We have a reset library, right? So
mm,
digital reset, and the reset includes some presence and mindfulness. Not all of them. Some is more awe oriented, so awe is an emotion and brings joy and peace. Some include oneness. Some includes confidence and courage. We have them specific for parents, as we were talking about parents, specific
mhm,
for teens, specific for schools and teachers. Your teacher friends that are stressed, we have some for them specifically, right? So it's person specific and it's method specific, and all of them have different, right? So meditation has like the more mindfulness with your presence, and the other one is more open monitoring. There's actually 11 types of different meditation or categories
mhm.
that I've kind of studied, but it has nothing to do with spirituality. It's not prayer.
Mm-mm.
It is
Could
training your
be, but
brain.
isn't. Yeah,
it is
totally.
it is
Training
simply
for
training your brain. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And like you train to the gym to be healthy, right?
Right.
Your brain, if you let it to its own device, is going to be bad at doing things in a proper way that's balanced for you. Is going to be good at being fearful, having a negativity bias, ruminating, being distracted. That's what the brain does, right?
It's gonna listen to you whether it's not gonna tell you whether something's healthy or not. It's going to, again, what you practice is what becomes permanent, right? So if you practice, looking at your cell phone every 5 minutes, or you practice road rage, or you practice, and I'm not saying consciously practice, but that's how your brain sees it. So meditation is a practice, mindfulness, being present, whatever, is a practice that I'd rather a brain practice that,
Yeah.
right? To And so if you have, it's remarkable to watch in a workplace. I was at a workplace yesterday, my business partner and I were doing a information session on our adult programming, and this place was incredible, and they had a whole section for employees that was a play section. And I'm
Mhm.
not talking like, the trendy stuff. We've kind of the Google Playrooms, but they had ping pong, they had, the darts, they had a play section, they have a mindfulness section. They have like
Wow.
it's almost like they looked at that platter.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know whether they did or not, but they're really trying to integrate that. And it was a wellness fair we were a part of. It's
Mhm.
if you've ever heard of Working Well, they're an
Yeah.
organization that go
Mhm.
across and do these amazing Working Well events, and it's really reassuring to see those pieces not just be a piece on the website, like a school,
Mhm.
right? Oh, we do all these things, but do they? Do they actually practice it? And they do. I was like, this is amazing. Like, is this really happening? Because that's really where you get the best out of people. That's how you get the best. If you're thinking, "Oh, okay, we've got to get the best out of our people," that's how you do it. Or if you're in a school and you're like, we're trying to build good citizens, that's how you do it. You actually practice the things you want them to be.
But it isn't, what students are told is like try harder.
Try harder. Oh, we just did a post on that. Try we were like, "That's funny you said that." We just did like try harder doesn't work, doesn't
Yeah.
fix the problem. Try hard doesn't fix the problem. It just makes someone feel the time students are heard, people are heard, just try harder. Just try harder. What if they're already trying harder? What does that say, right? What if you try your best on something and I said, Christian, if you could just try harder on that, it would be better. Like it's like stab you, right? Like what can we say? Our words, right? How
Yes.
you're processing.
So
How do
self
you
words and words to others. I'm I'm working on such section of a new book that includes self talk and
yeah,
also talk to others and right. So for many years I keep saying whenever I hear someone say the word hate, I say you can just say I don't like. Right.
yeah.
You just by saying that your level of anger, your amygdala is calmer just by changing your words. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's so true that our self-talk, and again, I wish I have that stat somewhere. You probably can find it at some point, is like I was saying earlier, that level of internal, like encouraging us all to hear what we're saying to ourselves, that self awareness to be like, when you start to become aware of it, you don't even realize that's what you were saying to yourself. It's become this habit of, just the self talk is like 7,000 times faster than what you could say to me, Sam. You've delayed on this project for a month. And my internal voice for the last month has been like, Sam, I can't believe you haven't got to the project. Like, what's wrong with you? You've been procrastinating. Like, I'm going to take that, not because you've said something, but that's my own self talk. So when you
Yeah.
think of wellness, right,
Yeah.
and impulsivity in the brain, that's stopping it in its track and being well. What really happened there wasn't purposeful. You had XYZ, you chose to focus on these areas. Now you can take control and do this, talking back to your brain, but yeah, without sounding, there's people who are like, oh, that's just, it's just airy fairy stuff, that meditating, mindfulness. Like, no, it's actually brain science.
It is brain science and it is psychology science. It does it. There is a lot of studies that look at fMRIs and EEGs of meditation. I got an EEG doing not doing meditation, but that showed that I'm a good focusing person, which also is meditation again is brain training, right?
Mhm.
So you want to go to the mental gym, learn how to do something adjacent to controlling your brain. We do again have this on our Patreon. We got a few new subscribers actually this week, even from Europe. So if you want to check out their Patreon at AWE Digital Wellness, please go and take a look. We have over 50 resets already, and we can tailor them to your company, your school, as mentioned. Tell us a little bit more also, Samantha, where we can find your services? What are you focusing on in the next few months?
Oh, so many things.
Mhm.
I was supposed to be slowing down, but here we go.
Yeah.
It's the world is keeping me busy for sure. You can find out, go to our website, www.kaizen, education, educ.com. We're actually we will be rebranding to Global Brain Academy. We're moving much more globally now. But for now, you'll see Kaizen Educ, EDUC. And on there, you can check out um, our student programs, our adult programs, our really, we are coaching students and adults to unlock potential of their brains. So we have a number, we have a getting started bundle, we have in-person coaching, online coaching, and then we're working with corporate um, groups to and individual adults to not only assess in a really comprehensive assessment. It's called the CAP, Cognitive Architectural Profile, where we take all the things we've talked about today and assess in these 5 key areas, and then really provide someone with a brain blueprint, essentially, and then coach around that should they choose to want coaching for those pieces. So individualized support. They can find out about that, or they can just email us. You can email me, Samantha at kaizeneduc.com, and happy to help anybody or any organization that wants to be better for their employees and their teams.
Thanks, Samantha. I'm sure that you've been doing an impact over a decade already with many of those organizations and individual people. So thank you for that. It's really appreciated. You mentioned it's going to be a global brain network, so it's going to be a big brain soon.
Yeah,
We're
one
putting
big,
all the brain
big
together.
brain. Hopefully, I can keep my amygdala smaller
Yeah.
as we, make a bigger brain. Uh, but yes, we're going global. We do have global clients. We're just formalizing it more now and really working because we can with our new AI networks and working with different countries who really are prioritizing these pieces ahead of North America in a lot of ways, and working in those areas to unlock potential. And I mean, to your point, bring about peace and happiness. Like, isn't that
Yeah.
just what we all want? Like, we can work better, do better, all the things, but really, we just want to be content and happy.
I
And
wrote some piece on happiness at work. It increased positivity, decreased burnout. Like
yeah,
it's a real thing. It's like, oh, we're gonna be more happy at work. Well, yeah, it's good for people. It's good for business. It's good for the world, right? Let's put our big brains together.
why
Global brain.
not?
Yes.
I mean, it takes a village. Now it's going to take a world. Like it used to be take a village. Now it's going to take all of us to put out this energy of self-awareness, and it's up to us to do that. I should mention too, actually, if anybody does want any free resources, if you go to resources on our website, you can get free stuff too. You don't have to pay for everything. And we have these quizzes, self-assessments as well that are no charge. So they are welcome. Anybody's welcome to access those as well to be like, where's my brain at? And burnout, that's what I was like, the level of burnout. I was like, we have a burnout quiz. Like, where's your brain? And so, yeah,
Yeah,
we look forward to
we have
working with you.
small assessments on our website as well, more on the digital balance. But I would love to have a blueprint on of my brain. Like
Yeah,
that's always fun. So
it's
I'll
exciting.
I'll, I'll take you up on the offer.
It's
Is that like
exciting.
a cooking recipe? Can you replicate it after that when you have the
Right? Yeah,
blueprint?
you just put more sprinkle of this and a sprinkle of that, and
I
you know,
did eat brain in Morocco. We're talking about traveling in different cultures, right? So I was like, "What is this?" And like I thought it was something else, but it was actually brain, right? So,
really.
yeah. But not human brain.
Well,
I
that's
think
good.
I
That's
think it was
good.
sheep or something like that, or goat.
High
Yeah.
protein, I feel like.
Well, yeah, yeah. There's weirder things in the world for sure. So wanted to end kind of the segment. This is kind of the real talk section, which is like we talked a lot about brains, work. Tell us a personal story, something that you may not have shared before that you want to share with the
Oh,
audience. Yeah.
well, maybe, a big part of my why, I think that's always kind of a really, I love asking other people about their why. So perhaps someone would like to hear that part.
Yeah.
Um, from a very early age was very we immigrated to Canada. I was born in Canada, but we lived in England. My parents were English and came back to Canada. I had lived in England for a long time, came back in grade 6 with, this strong accent, and I was the weird kid in the classroom. I was brought to Calgary, Alberta, which was not as diverse as it is now. We're still not super diverse, but we're getting there. But I think from day one, that was my feeling of not belonging. And really, I had an accent, and I wore weird clothes, and I had weird, and I'm using quotes, right? I had weird food,
Yeah.
and I think that really pushed me to later in life to really, I always found those kids, right, who didn't quite fit, who weren't, the first ones being asked on the playground and weren't the first ones to be included. And that was because I mean, I was a very sensitive kiddo. And I look back now and I'm like, oh, I was the profile of the kids that I work with now, which is interesting. So I loved books, I loved learning, I loved sports. I was very not, I was more kind of a tomboy than I was into what my friends were into. So I learned a lot early about my own brain, but didn't know that till later. And I had a real sensitivity for those kids and for adults now who just don't fit that mold. And, once I forced myself to speak Canadian, as you can tell, I have no accent anymore.
Yeah.
But that's what we do as a society, right? Conform. And when someone conforms, they fit. And I was like, I had an aha moment last year. I was like, I think that's where that started is brains, like we don't want brains to conform. We want to celebrate and to honor what you were given, no matter what it was, and figure out where the and I people say, oh, there's no deficits. I'm like, are you kidding? Everybody has deficits. Like, it's okay. We all have deficits and we all have strengths, right? So my why was being that little British kid who um, I guess really I just never wanted anybody to feel that way. And yeah,
Thanks for sharing, and feel free to bring back the British accent.
the British
Like,
accent.
yeah. What do
It
you?
comes back sometimes when I go over there. My relatives start talking. I'm like, oh, where did that come from? It's
Yeah,
in
yeah.
there. It's in there somewhere.
Yeah, I had a girlfriend from Toulouse, France, and then she spoke like pretty standard French, but when she was with her Toulouse friends, like it
Yeah,
just came, what is that? Yeah,
it's like a different language,
yeah.
different.
Uh,
And it's hopeful because now that's so accepted. Like I have so many people say what you said, which is, "Oh, I wish you had that accent. I wish you had that accent." And back then it just was kind of weird. And yeah, I think this inclusivity to the point of, you know, acceptance around we all are different, so
yeah,
nobody's different.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, there is still some again brain reason. I'm actually I'm actually writing a piece on glottophobia, which is the fear of being discriminated by a language.
Oh, mhm.
All right, and that includes accents. So
Interesting.
so I did some research. There's some psychological reason, societal reason, systemic reason, and there's also some brain reasons, right?
Of course, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Right. So it is kind of the fear of not conforming, as you
Yep,
mentioned, and then that triggers the fear response to the amygdala
totally.
because we know historically that if you're not part of the group, you might not get food or shelter. You might get kicked out of the village, right?
Yeah.
So all this is tied again through language, through all those biases that our brains have can always come back to the brain. And then I do have a small stat because I was looking last night at Stats Canada census 2021. Calgary has 53% of people that were in 2021 first and second born immigrants.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
you said that it is getting better, but yeah,
Getting there.
it's
Yeah.
more than half now, right? So
Yeah,
I'm sure it wasn't the same when you arrived, right?
sure wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't. And even, my parents too, just a very different it was a very different world. And, as a white middle class woman, I have never experienced the level of discrimination a new Canadian might experience. And I think about how I felt as a child or a young woman. And I escalate that in my brain and think, wow, to not belong, right? There's something about that word belonging in the brain that, again, it's primal. If you're part of your tribe, you can do anything. If you know you have backup, you have support, you have people protecting you when you can't protect yourself, the brain is safe. And that safety piece is so critical to success, however you want to define success. Because until that child or adult feels safe, there will always be a threat. And so I'm really reassured in our part of the world. I just got back from Indonesia and was amazed, and Singapore as well. And I was amazed that walking around Singapore, like our taxi driver said, I never grew up knowing a difference. Like I never until now realized that I've grown up with Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Buddhist, but and whatever. And he said, I never actually occurred to me that that was odd because that's just what I grew up with. But now that he has access to so much more information. He's like, I can't imagine living in a world where everything is different according to these, like there's a segregation piece. So it was really fascinating from a cultural perspective to be, wow, just to feel that sense of belonging from day one.
um, I've been to Singapore a few times, love it, and it's true. Most people speak four languages there, and the good thing about having five cultures is that you get to celebrate all the religious holidays. So
It's
they get Christmas,
amazing.
and again they get all the holidays.
And
Right?
the food. Like I have never eaten so many different types of food because I think every culture is represented there. It's incredible.
And I'm also lucky to have been born and I don't know if raised, but born in Montreal. Grew up here, and from the get go, I had friends from Europe, Latin America, Asia. I had Japanese, Arabic speaking friends, like from elementary school a long time ago. And then my son was born in 2010, and same thing for him, right? Um, Best friend Japanese, then German, then Persian, and just like, and then one day, like years later, him and his best friend, they come back, and I hear them talk, and then they eventually came back to me, and it's like, we learned in school that there's this thing called racism. They're like,
You're
and
like,
they're talking to each other
"Wow."
like, that's crazy. It means that me and you, we shouldn't be friends. Yeah, right?
You're like, ah, out of the mouths of babes, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah,
A
the
learned a learned, mindset.
hmm
Absolutely, right?
yeah.
Kids
Well,
don't see differences.
there
Well,
there
they
were
do, but it's usually like, "Oh, you have, this type of Pokemon card and I don't." Like, that's the difference.
and there is as we mentioned, some part that is brain, but if we can, with education and an example and practice, and show that we can live in this, Montreal has the most um, multicultural couples in any city in the world. Most multicultural couples. So like all those things make a lot of differences in when you live in the world that you grew up in, it becomes the norm, or if you're right. And so the stats is Toronto and Vancouver have much more than Calgary in terms of um, firstborn or second born immigrants. The thing is, Toronto is 80% of those,
Mhm,
but they live where? In ghettos, right?
mhm,
So it's not the economical ghettos, the cultural ghettos. There's some
mhm,
place in
mhm,
that you speak only Korean, only Russian, only Ukrainian, right?
mhm,
So that's the danger also when you're having this number. Like, so what is it in the day-to-day life, right? I've been to places in Toronto that were really just a whole building or just this or this or Nigerian, all right. So and the reason for that is again the tribalism, right? So you don't feel accepted by the community at large. So you go to someone who looks like you or who eats the same food like you or might give you a
mhm,
shelter if you need, right? And that's okay. And we need always those community, but I think education could also teach the danger of ghettoization, right? One of the person I met at the Canadian Psychological Association was making research saying that she was doing research on entrepreneurship in immigrants.
mm, mhm.
They said there are more of them. They are more successful than non-immigrants. They are more successful on the small scale because they
Mhm.
normally can only stay in their community. They work in their area. They don't become national or international as much. They do, right? We see examples. Um, Elon Musk is partly Canadian, and look where he is, um, and South African immigrant at some point. But we have to also think of those things. When you have the community that is safety, but
Mhm,
it also can stifle you if you don't want to go and say hi to the other community and say, "Oh,
mhm.
you're nice too. Can we play with you guys too, or and girls?" Right? So that's kind of the challenges that we see in society, and it's again related to the brain of fear, amygdala, or safety, community, right? And let's try to find a balance of all that.
What we know, right? Humans, we gravitate to what we know and feel comfortable with,
Yeah.
right? And that comfort zone of moving out of it is a challenge, right? And sometimes a generational change, right? Over generations, gradually starts to happen. And what is the fear? Probably that same fear of not belonging, right? And not finding the foods that other people, you know, just this judgment piece, or just maybe feeling comfortable when you're missing home, right? Being
Yes.
around people that sound like you and eat like you, and but then you risk isolation for sure.
Yeah, and it's not either the opposite, which is assimilation or denying your cultural. Right? So
Mhm.
it's kind of always that like bring this into explore with that, and in the again brain sense, this is cognitive flexibility, right?
Yeah.
Are you able to get this and this at the same time? Are you able to hold them as potential contradiction, even, right? People don't like contradiction, they don't like uncertainty, but our brain is made to live in contradiction and uncertainty,
Yeah.
right?
I know. It's an interesting duality of design, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have a big question for whoever did that.
Thanks so much, Samantha. We can do this for hours. And please, when your brain becomes global, let's talk again, and we'll invite you again.
That world.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Uh,
thank you so much for having me today, and great questions. Really great discussion. I could nerd
like,
out for hours.
yeah, same here, and likewise, glad that you're helping the world and organization in so many way. Let's keep in touch, and thank you all for the listeners. If you're watching live and you still around and you have a question or two, we are live on X X, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So catch us on the next time. Do we have the guests for next week? I'm sure we do. But look out for all those platforms. We will be streaming live next Friday. Have a good weekend, everyone, and thanks so much, Samantha.
Thank
Um,
you. And keep
you
doing what
you're
you're
you
doing.
thank you. We try and we have fun doing it. So
The important thing. Find the joy in it.
yes,
Otherwise, we couldn't do it because we're both tired, right? Something keeps us going.
that's good. If I'm not finding the joy, I'll come hold your hand and look at the tattoo.
Yeah, I may force you to get one.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thanks for listening. Have a good one, Samantha.
You too.